In the last video, I mentioned a few specific viruses like influenza or flu and the more recent COVID that are directly related to electromagnetic radiation, AM radio, cell phone signals, electricity, all these things. There are a lot of viruses like that that you can just look at the data and it's easy to see that it's the increased EMF or changes that we're making to the EMF or changes that we're making to our atmosphere that are causing these diseases. That's easy to see. But there are a lot of viruses that don't fit that pattern. So let's talk about those now. We'll start with some dog viruses, since this is a veterinary channel and I'm a veterinarian. So the most common vaccine you get at the vet is rabies. We'll come back to that. The next most common vaccine you get is the combo shot. It's called the distemper parvo combo. There's actually 4 things in it, usually. 2 of them are distemper and parvo. We're going to start with parvo. It's kind of the more common of all these things that we actually see. So parvo is described as a virus, and it's described as being contagious. You've heard in my previous videos that contagious is not how it works. So what happens in parvo? Parvo is a virus that's found in cells when dogs, usually young puppies, usually a poor economic situation, a dirty, poop infested backyard. It's usually poor husbandry, poor sanitation, low income, low education, things like that, a really dirty situation, or stray. It's usually young puppies who still have a weak immune system because they're not adults yet. And what happens is the lining of the intestines sloughs off. All the cells that line the intestine that are supposed to absorb your nutrients, they just get destroyed and they're gone, to where the animal is bleeding and excreting all of their water. They get so dehydrated from diarrhea that they die from it. They lose all their minerals, all their proteins, all their nutrients, their blood, and their hydration, and they die from it. And it's a terrible thing. It's a real thing. Parvo is a real thing. I'm here to argue that it's not a random contagious virus, that is part of the immune system and nature trying to detoxify the cells of the gut. So if we come back to where we usually see parvo in a really dirty, poor sanitation situation, you can even ask your regular vet. They'll basically agree with me on this part, that usually when they see parvo, it's a really dirty, poor sanitation, poor husbandry problem. It's not usually healthy, clean dogs that see it. So they even understand it's about the environment or the terrain or the situation the dog's in that makes them sick. They'll usually stop short of agreeing with me that it's not contagious. It looks contagious because a whole litter of puppies will have parvo, not because it's contagious, but because they're all in the same dirty situation, getting the same disease from the same situation they're in. Okay, so there's a vaccine against parvo. I don't really think it works. I think once they're vaccinated, it looks like it works because usually parvo happens in really young puppies, and usually by the time that they've had their vaccines, they're old enough that they wouldn't get parvo anyway. That's not perfect, but that's how it tends to look. So my experience with parvo has always been young, malnourished puppies in poor situations. But I did have an experience with an older adult 8-year-old dog. So let me throw that in there because it doesn't fit perfectly. Actually, my brother got a puppy from the shelter, and the puppy was fine and healthy and everything went good. But within a few days or weeks of getting it, his 8-year-old dog, who had been vaccinated against parvo years earlier, he may not have been up to date, but he had had the vaccines, he got parvo. Well, they went to the vet, and the vet got him through the parvo, and he lived because he wasn't so young, and that was done. That was in my first year out of vet school, and it never made sense to me why this adult dog who had had vaccines got parvo. I didn't know anything holistic then. I was really, really new. A few months later, he starts having symptoms of Cushing's disease. Cushing's disease is an overproduction of cortisol, or a stress hormone, and that suppresses your immune system. So now I know that when a dog gets some disease, an adult dog who's vaccinated against parvo, I know to look for something else. That dog had a weak immune system, and we just didn't see the symptoms of that yet. So that's not because parvo is contagious. My brother had a few other dogs. They didn't get parvo. The puppy who was carrying parvo for some reason or had been exposed to parvo, he didn't have signs or symptoms or illness of it. But the older dog with weak immune system is the one who actually got sick with parvo and the symptoms. And that's because the younger dog probably had some amount of toxicity in his gut that the parvo was cleaning out, but it wasn't so much that would make him sick. whereas the older adult dog had a lifetime of dry kibble and toxic stuff in his gut. And once the virus or exosome or whatever Parvo is, once it got in there, it had to clean out his whole lining of his whole gut, and that gave him terrible diarrhea and dehydration and made him really, really ill. So that's how that works. Let me circle back around to a few diseases that you may know better or that you recognize the names of. So rabies is in dogs and people. We'll come back to that in a minute. The most common ones that people really recognize or understand is like measles or polio. People my age and older remember or know of polio, okay? Well, if you look at the timelines and the charts and the public records, polio spiked and increased as the use of DDT increased. Remember those pictures from the 50s, or if you're old enough to have been there, of the military trucks driving the streets, spraying out heavy layer of foggy mist DDT chemical, and the kids running around behind it, playing in it like it was a water sprinkler? That's when polio came out, okay? And polio peaked right after the use of DDT pesticides peaked. And then two things happened. We started using less and less DDT, and polio went down. The other thing that happened is the vaccine came out. If you look at the charts and the graphs, it looks like polio started coming down as the vaccine started getting widely used. And it does look that way. But here's something you don't know. Very few people know this, but you can look it up. It's out there. The government changed the definition of polio when the vaccine came out. You could no longer look at somebody who looked like they had polio and call it polio. You had to do specific testing. You had to really isolate the polio to call it polio. So we went from a place where everybody that looked like they had polio was being diagnosed with polio, and the polio numbers were high. And then they changed it when the vaccine came out to where all of a sudden less people were being diagnosed with polio, even though there was just as much of it around. And that makes it look like the vaccine made the polio decrease and go down. Polio symptoms and polio still exist. We just now call it acute flaccid paralysis. We see it in dogs sometimes. They're flaccid, which is just limp, paralyzed, just like polio. We see it sometimes. It's in other animals too. It's big in India still. Well, they use a ton of DDT in India. It goes right along with DDT. So my point is, the previous video, I talked about how electricity and changes to the electrical environment cause certain viruses. Chemicals and toxins in the body cause or are related to or associated with other viruses. Polio is a prime example. Measles is a prime example. Plenty of people know, and you can look this up easily. It's not hard to find. Kids who get measles tend to be healthier afterwards and don't get as many diseases the rest of their life. Kids that don't get measles are unhealthier. Measles serves a purpose. It comes through at a certain time in development to clean out some toxins or to prepare the immune system for adulthood or something like that. I don't know exactly what it is. The point I'm making is it's not the contagious virus that we've been told it is. It's something else related to the individual immune system and the individual environment. All viruses are that way. They're not what we've been told. I'm not saying they don't exist. They are there. I'm just saying that we've got them completely wrong about what they're doing and how they're working. The whole group of kids gets measles at the same time, not because it's contagious, but because they're all the same age and they're going through the same development process and detoxifying and changing their immune system because they're the same age, okay? Rabies is another big one. Everybody's scared of rabies, and rightly so. People and animals die of rabies. You can go back in history hundreds of years. Rabies is not consistent. Rabies, hundreds of years ago, that you would see rabies, and then there would be 200 or 300 years where nobody saw any rabies. There's Native American drawings hundreds of years ago of bats and dogs in the same caves hanging out together. Rabies is supposed to be spread by bats and rabid animals. Bats usually live in caves with a lot of toxic waste. Well, maybe rabies is associated with that. What I've heard several times in my veterinary career, a dog with rabies or suspected rabies or a person, they'd say they would not have any history of a rabid dog didn't bite me. I didn't get in a fight with a rabid coyote or a rabid skunk or raccoon. How'd I get rabies? How'd the dog get rabies? The excuse is always the same. Well, a bat must have bitten you. Well, bats fit in your hand. They're the size of a mouse. They're a mouse with wings. They're even smaller than a mouse with wings. So the argument is, if it bites you with its two little teeth and you're asleep in the middle of the night, you may not even notice you got bit. Okay, maybe, whatever. But that's their reason. There's no proof of a bat must have gotten you. Well, bats don't come after people. I remember as a child being told stories that bats would get stuck in your hair and attack you. I've been outside with bats plenty of times, watching them catch mosquitoes and stuff. They know what they're doing. They're better, their sonar guides them better than a nuclear submarine or a jet aircraft. They can pinpoint in on a mosquito and catch it just over and over and over each second. They're not going to accidentally bump into my big head, okay? And they're not going to accidentally get in your window through your screen and bite you for no reason. That's just, there's not a good reason. Rabies doesn't make any sense. We just have to make up these stories. Oh, a bat must have bitten you in the middle of the night and you didn't know it. Well, that's not real. There's no proof to that. You can't just blame it on that. Early on, rabies was blamed on poor nutrition or some other situation in the environment. This is before electricity, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s maybe. They were seeing rabid dogs, but they were foaming at the mouth and they had a neurologic issue that was either from poor diet, poor nutrition, starving to death. Something like that is what they thought was causing it. And that could still make perfect sense in the modern environment. If you see a skunk or a raccoon that's rabid, doesn't mean it got bitten by a rabid coyote or something. It could just be malnourished, it could just be malnourished or drinking toxic water from a creek from all the chemicals we use in the environment. So we don't have a good explanation for that. All I'm saying is it's not what they've convinced us it is. You could still die from it, but it's not what we're convinced it is. So this idea of vaccinating everybody and everything for it is not what solves the problem. It's getting the chemicals out of the environment and getting better nutrition that solves these problems. Come back to the other dog one that's in the combo shot, the distemper parvo combo shot. Distemper. Distemper is a neurologic or GI or respiratory disease. It can do different things. It's the same family, very closely associated with measles in people and very closely associated with the cattle disease. I think it's rinderpest. Well, it serves a purpose. It cleans out a toxic environment and you're healthier after it. Distemper in dogs, if you get distemper and survive, you're immune to it forever. Even the distemper vaccine may not make you immune forever or have antibodies forever. If you get it, you're immune forever, just like kids with the measles, because it's the same kind of disease. It has a purpose to clean out some toxins in our environment or ready us for the next phase of our immune system's life and health and exposure. Okay. There was plenty of information about this. This video is already too long, so I need to stop it quickly. And I want to tell you all about this, but it would take me days. There are thousands of books. There are documentaries. There are YouTube videos. There are podcasts. Plenty of information will show you the charts and the graphs that show that diseases peak and come down related to something we change in the environment, cleanliness or sanitation or nutrition or health. They start coming down before the vaccine gets to full use. It's not the vaccines that bring these things down. Or they change the definition of disease so we're not reporting as many cases of it when the vaccine comes out. Plenty of examples for that, especially for polio. Polio is a great one to look up for that. That's all for now. Thank you.